Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, this is Emperor of Rome's recommendation over on the Discord recommendation channel. If you're new to the channel, my name's Connor. Hello. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. I like to learn about history through YouTube recommendations. The original link to this video will be at the top description below, like always. Right below that will be the Discord link. Love for you to join. Pull up a chair. Nice atmosphere. Everyone's nice most of the time. All right, let's get into it. Attack on Pearl Harbor, 1941. This is part of a series, I'm understanding. Montemayor. Is it? All right, let's do it. If you're not ready to learn. If you are not ready to learn. There's the door. Get the hell out. Or just chill, that's fine too. All right, let's go.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Stay tuned to WOR for further development.
That was the real news.
1941, Japan situation. America and other nations have imposed an oil embargo on Japan, which means Japan cannot continue their conquests. No problem. Japan would just get the oil it needs from the Dutch Indies. Their underfunded and undergunned fleet will pose no threat to the Imperial Japanese Navy. And if their ally, Great Britain, joins the conflict, well, Japan will fight them too. Both nations are too occupied with the European war anyways. So, through their new conquests, Japan's demand for resources shall be met. However, geography has cursed them. Look at what lays beside their vital supply lines. The Philippines, a US territory. Although America is not officially allied with the British and the Dutch, they are on friendly terms. Japan cannot afford the risk of the US entering the war while they are in the midst of their campaign. Their proximity to Japan's supply lines puts into jeopardy everything they are about to fight for. Basically, the Americans would be holding a dagger to Japan's throat the entire time they conduct their campaign, ready to commence hostilities at a moment's notice. Thus, they come to the conclusion that they must take out the Americans as well. This calls not only for an invasion of the Philippines, but also a preemptive strike on the powerful American fleet at Pearl Harbor. And so with that, history was set. Japan set its powerful Kido Butai to strike Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7th. Now, the goal of the raids was as follows. 1. Sink a battleship. This was for propaganda purposes. Japan reasoned that if America saw their beloved battleships, symbols of their naval power, destroyed, their will to wage war against Japan would be shattered as well. 2. Immobilize the fleet for 6 months. The Japanese estimated that they needed 6 months to do all their conquests. Then they would be on the defensive and await the American counterattacks and wear them down, culminating in a decisive naval clash. So note, the Japanese knew they could not win a long-term war with America, so Japanese strategy revolved on...
I heard that, so I know he might go into this stuff, but so the carrier fleet was not at port, so the carriers were spared, and the Japanese, I believe, intentionally did not hit the oil drums because it would make it much more difficult with all the smoke to hit the battleships accurately. And so hindsight's 2020, but I think, I'm not sure, obviously this isn't my opinion, I just think I remember hearing that they might have been better off if they just hit all the fuel resources. I don't know, let's learn, but that's what I heard.
So note, the Japanese knew they could not win a long-term war with America, so Japanese strategy revolved on them waging a short-term war. This was why attacking the fuel tanks or naval facilities at Pearl Harbor was not even considered in the planning phase. It was irrelevant to the 6-month goal. At Pearl Harbor were some 80 ships. There were 8 battleships, 7 of them were waging a short-term war. This was why attacking the fuel tanks or naval facilities at Pearl Harbor was not even considered in the planning phase. It was irrelevant to the 6-month goal.
Maybe I'm wrong.
At Pearl Harbor were some 80 ships. There were 8 battleships, 7 of them in battleship role and 1 in dry dock. 8 cruisers were at Pearl Harbor, 4 of which were accessible to torpedoes, and dozens of destroyers and auxiliaries were docked elsewhere. Unfortunately for the Japanese, the 3 American carriers were all at sea and not in port that fateful day. The attack on Pearl Harbor would be carried out by 6 fleet carriers and its strike force of 350 planes. Their crews had endured 10 months of training for this attack. In addition, 5 midget submarines would be tasked with penetrating the harbor and attacking in conjunction with the main airstrike. The attack would be composed of 2 waves. During the first wave, Lieutenant Fuchida commanded a strike against the ships in the harbor. The key to the first wave was the 50 level bombers and 40 torpedo bombers, also known as Kates. Their torpedoes had been modified with wooden fins so that they could be effective in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor. Torpedoes had been modified with wooden fins so that they could be effective in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor. Their priority targets were the battleships and carriers at port. The first wave of 183 aircraft was launched at 6 a.m. The strike force approached Oahu, and soon the formation separated into groups to attack their assigned airfields and targets. The sky was completely clear of American fighters. The Japanese had achieved complete surprise.
Oh.
The dive bombers beat the torpedo bombers to Pearl Harbor, the first bombs hitting the southern tip of Ford Island minutes before even the first torpedo had been launched. Planes from Hiru and Soryu approached at 7:55. They were disappointed to discover that their targets, the carriers, were not in port that day. Lieutenant Nagai, leader of Soryu's air group, realized there were no potential targets, so he and his wingman pulled off. However, the remaining 6 attacked.
I was going to say, did they have a backup plan for those trying to get the carriers?
So he and his wingman pulled off. However, the remaining 6 attacked. They probably mistook the old decommissioned battleship, the USS Utah, as a capital ship, and they fired upon her. 2 torpedoes slammed into her before 8 a.m. The rest missed. One missed so badly that the USS Raleigh was hit. The Utah capsized at 8:12. The Raleigh almost suffered a similar fate, but prompt damage control prevented her from capsizing. Nagai went around Ford Island and launched against what he believed was a battleship. In reality, it was just a cruiser, the USS Helena. She was double berthed with an old mine layer, the Ogallala. Its silhouette probably gave the impression of a battleship. His torpedo actually went under Ogallala's heel and exploded into Helena's hull, damaging both ships. Nagai's wingman recognized that it was just a cruiser and decided to attack Battleship Row instead. The 8 Hiru planes didn't fare any better. Lieutenant Hirata and his wingman saw that there were no viable targets, so they headed for Battleship Row. However, the remaining 6 aircraft who were lagging behind got to see Nagai's attack on Helena and followed suit. 4 launched torpedoes, but they all missed terribly. The last pair aborted their run at the last minute and headed for the battleships. So now we have 4 Hiru and 1 Soryu plane maneuvering for Battleship Row, cutting right across the path of the other 24 torpedo bombers who were just coming in.
One thing that I'm not sure, and I wonder if this is going to say, did the U.S. did we ever get planes off the ground to ever go into combat, or was it just there wasn't enough time and they attacked airfields and then they just left without any air-to-air combat?
In this photograph, you can see the opening stages of the attack.
Wow. Think about how, so that's the water going up from an explosion, I'm guessing, right there. And those are tall ships, and just look how...
Both the Utah and Raleigh have been hit, and Utah is listing to port. At this moment, the torpedo runs against the battleships have begun. You can even spot 2 planes finishing their bomb runs. Due to the geography of Pearl Harbor, the torpedo bombers really just had one avenue of approach. If they had gone over the naval buildings, the turbulence would have thrown off their accuracy and limited their launch window.
Wow, that's cool. So, well, this guy right here has, it seems like, I'm not sure if it's too shallow. So you got to go over this land and kind of go, I'm assuming there's a minimum elevation above the water, or a maximum that you can drop the torpedo to be accurate, and for it to not just hit the bottom.
If they had gone over the naval buildings, the turbulence would have thrown off their accuracy and limited their launch window.
Oh, it's cool. So it's not so much just going up and down, it's just the turbulence. Gotcha.
Buildings, the turbulence would have thrown off their accuracy and limited their launch window. Therefore, the overwhelming majority of the Cape bombers flew single file down the southeast lock. The result was that instead of the attack being spread out, it would be disproportionately concentrated on the southern tip of Battleship Row, much to Oklahoma's and West Virginia's despair. 12 Akagi planes approached single file, 1,000 feet apart, starting at 7:57. All of Akagi's 12 planes launched against these 2 battleships, except one, which skillfully maneuvered and struck the California. The 4 Hiru planes from before joined shortly afterward and struck the California. 2 battleships. except one,
I said I
which
wouldn't
skillfully
pause.
maneuvered and struck the California.
That's a good pilot.
The 4 Hiru planes from before joined shortly afterwards and launched against Oklahoma and West Virginia. Contrary to belief, the Japanese were not attacking with impunity. The defenders had taken advantage of the precious minutes warning afforded by the Ford Island bomb blast, so that when the first torpedo planes of Akagi approached, many anti-aircraft gunners were already prepared. These vulnerable, slow-moving Kates had to make their torpedo runs under fire. 3 miles behind Akagi's strike was Kaga's air group. By now, the anti-aircraft fire was becoming more effective, and again,
I would really want to be on that first. You never really say you'd want to be like the first ones into a battle or on the front line on any battle situation. You're most likely to die. But in this case, in a surprise attack with a plane where you have this mission to attack the ship and then use your fuel to get home, or if you have another bomb, it seems like you'd want to go first in this situation, because then they're just going to be, unless you just demolish. I said I wouldn't
Kaga's
pause.
air group. By now,
I'm
the
gonna
anti-aircraft fire was becoming more effective, and again, Oklahoma and West Virginia took the brunt of the attack. In the middle of their launch, that single Soryu plane from earlier swept in and got a hit on the California. However, one of Kaga's plane veered to the right because of this, but was able to hit the Nevada at 8:03. Kaga's air group was the only one to suffer losses. 5 of the last 7 attacking Kates were shot down. In this historic photograph, the torpedo attack is perfectly captured. You can see the torpedo hits on the Oklahoma. West attack is perfectly captured. You can see the torpedo hits on the Oklahoma, West Virginia, and the California. All of them are gushing out oil. In the background, you can see Hickam Field burning, and the Helena can be seen leaning against the Oglala. And a Japanese plane can also be spotted. However, the attack wasn't executed as smoothly as hoped. An attack that should have taken less than 90 seconds stretched out over 11 minutes from first run to last. Some had to abort and redo their runs due to mutual interference, and the heavy anti-aircraft fire threw off the pilot's aim and caused them to over-concentrate on just 2 battleships. 21 torpedoes were launched at Oklahoma and West Virginia, over half of the available torpedoes. Oklahoma had 12 torpedoes launched at her. 5 hit her, and she capsized in 15 minutes. West Virginia was hit by 7 torpedoes, but prompt counterflooding prevented her from capsizing, and she settled to the bottom. California should not have sunk from 2 torpedoes, but her hatches were open for inspection that morning, which contributed to her sinking. And she was abandoned due to fires, and when she was reboarded, it was too late. Of the 36 torpedoes launched, only 19 achieved hits. That's a 48% hit rate. 10,000 feet above came Fuchida.
I have no idea if that's good or not in your average torpedo dive run.
And his high-level bombers. Their mission was to take out the inboard battleships inaccessible. Came Fuchida and his high-level bombers. Their mission was to take out the inboard
Thanks, Julien, if it was you two originally. This is a cool channel.
battleships. 8 feet above came Fuchida and his high-level bombers. Their mission was to take out the inboard battleships inaccessible to torpedoes. They came in groups of 5. They released their salvos and scored an impressive 20% hit rate. Unfortunately for the Japanese, out of the 10 bomb hits, about 6
Look at all that oil.
were low-order detonations. Unfortunately for the Japanese, out of the 10 bomb hits, about 6 were low-order detonations or malfunctions. That is an outrageous 60% dud rate. The Japanese aviators were greatly let down by their weaponry. The damage could have been deadlier. However, the distribution was effective. California was missed, but 2 ineffective hits on Maryland were scored. Both West Virginia and the Tennessee were hit twice, and there were 2 additional collateral damage hits on the repair ship Vestal, moored outboard of the Arizona. Vestal suffered severe flooding and had to be beached afterwards. But all of these hits were overshadowed by the 2 hits on the USS Arizona. The first struck her aft on the quarterdeck, and another landed near her number 2 turret. It caused a magazine explosion, which exploded with a great force, and a tremendous fireball was seen. She split in half and struck her, but all of these hits were overshadowed. Landed near her number 2 turret, says Arizona. The first struck her aft on the quarterdeck, and another landed near her number 2 turret. It caused a magazine explosion, which exploded with a great force, and a tremendous fireball was seen. She split in half and sunk in the harbor, taking more than 1,000 sailors with her. Heavy fires burned for days. The explosion was actually caught on tape by Dr. Hackinson, who was on the hospital ship Solace. Who was on the hospital ship Solace. Nevada was the only battleship not suffering heavy damage and capable of getting underway. She did so at 8:40 with the intention of heading out of the channel. Now, one of the mini-subs actually did make it into the harbor. The other 4 were unsuccessful. At 8:36, the sea tender, the USS Curtis, spotted a sub. The submarine fired at Curtis but missed. In return, the submarine was hit by a 5-inch shell. The destroyer Monaghan, which happened to be getting underway at this moment, saw the sub and approached with the intent to ram her. The sub turned and fired its last torpedo, which missed the destroyer. At 8:40, the sub was rammed and depth charged. She sunk with both crew members killed.
Only 2 crew members.
167 planes formed the attack of the second wave, of which 78 were dive bombers allocated to go against warships. Much was expected from these skilled pilots, however, their performance was disappointing. First, take a moment to see what they were up against. By now, the anti-aircraft defenses were up and ready to greet the dive bombers. Couple this with the fact that there was a 70 to 90% low overcast, their accuracy was destined to be off. But most importantly, these pilots were guilty of poor target selection. This was their priority list. These dive bombers with their general purpose bombs were well...
So where do you put your best pilots? Do you put your best pilots in the first run to make sure that that is done perfectly? Or do you put your best pilots in the second wave where they're more likely to die because there's more, but they're more likely to see a situation and react to it since they're better pilots in a better way, but then you risk them at that point?
Suited. This was their priority list. These dive bombers with their general purpose bombs were well suited for attacking the 8 cruisers left in Pearl Harbor. But during the attack, about roughly 30 attacked battleships, only 17 went for cruisers, 16 attacked destroyers, and 12 attacked auxiliaries. The attack began at 8:54. The USS Nevada was caught in its escape during the second wave. The prospect of sinking the ship in the channel and thus blocking access to Pearl Harbor was a very, very improbable outcome. However, the pilots couldn't resist the opportunity, so they attacked from 2 directions. 14 to 18 valves dropped against Nevada. Nevada was hit 5 times by 9 o'clock. And at 9:10, she had to beach herself.
Wow, so they see her, the ship. Listen, I've never been in the Army, the military. I go like this, just for respect, and just natural. Maybe I'm brainwashed. No, but it's crazy how they saw this thing going, and they're like, all right, let's go in and see if we can sink it in the shallow entrance to the inner harbor and make it harder for other ships to get in there. Make you have to go down there and move it or whatnot. Smart.
So they attacked from 2 directions. 14 to 18 valves dropped against Nevada. Nevada was hit 5 times by 9 o'clock. And at 9:10, she had to beach herself. This was the shining moment of the second wave. But it deserves to be criticized. Did they contribute to sinking a battleship? Yeah, but it was by the rarest of luck. Nevada succumbed not to Japanese bombs, but to poor material condition, critical design flaws, and a massively significant damage control mistake. And again, it still doesn't make it any wiser. The battleship should have been avoided.
Can make
the attempt still doesn't make it any wiser. The battleship should have been avoided. The attempt to sink Nevada in the channel was a waste of ordnance that could have been better employed against targets more vulnerable to their effects. 1 to 3 dive bombers went for California, scoring 1 hit. The USS Pennsylvania, the fleet's flagship, the only battleship in dock, was also poorly selected. 9 bombers went after her. She suffered only a single hit at 9:06. The real victims, though, were the 2 destroyers ahead of her, which received collateral damage. 2 hit the Cassin and 1 hit the Downs, heavily damaging both.
Wow. Oh my god.
So there could be a cultural explanation to why the Japanese pilots went for battleships. These young 20-year-old pilots were going into the most significant battle in Japan's history. No one wanted to go back home and report that they attacked a simple cruiser or a destroyer. No way. They wanted to go for battleships, sticking true to their samurai spirit. But overall, the second wave attack was just scattered throughout Pearl Harbor, with many attacks.
Look, it's of course it's history, and I'm American. Some people can say it's stupid to be proud of your own country, but I like America. I love America, and I'm going to kind of be happy when good things happen or whatever. But I will acknowledge, you can say war crimes, or I am going to acknowledge the bravery and just really good job. Some say that they didn't do as well as they wanted to, but this is a nation where 100 years ago to think that they would be this much of a force so quickly, I've said in many videos, is just astounding and impressive. And hat goes off to Japanese Empire for doing that.
Attacks missing their
What about all the stuff they did? I know. Go ahead in the comments,
target.
whatever.
Overall, the second wave attack was just scattered throughout Pearl Harbor, with many attacks missing their targets. A puzzling target selection was the destroyer USS Shaw, which was targeted by as many as 15 bombers. 3 bombs hit her, one of which unleashed a tremendous fireball. The reason to her being targeted was probably because she was in a floating dry dock and resembled a capital ship. On the west side, the Curtis, a sea tender, was inexplicably targeted. A damaged FAL committed a suicide dive and crashed into her, and minutes later she was hit by a bomb. And lastly, the only hit on a top priority hit. A damaged FAL committed a suicide.
Okay.
And lastly, the only hit on a top priority target was on the Raleigh.
I was trying to see if they were intentionally suicide bombing, but he had a damaged plane, I guess, so why not go out with a boom?
And lastly, the only hit on a top priority target was on the Raleigh. As many as 5 dive bombers went for her, still listing from that torpedo hit. She was hit once at 9:08. Also, we can add a near miss on the Honolulu, which caused minor damage. So only 1 hit and 1 damage near miss were achieved on the dive bomber's highest priority targets. Against the 55% accuracy rate achieved during their training, the pilots got only 15 hits. That's a rather disappointing 19% hit rate.
It's always going to be harder, in the real thing.
It was a poor performance of the second wave. It contributed nothing substantial to the fleet in Pearl Harbor. Also, as in the case of the armor-piercing bombs, the general-purpose bombs were deficient. But the second wave had the opportunity to be more damaging. Take, for example, the Phoenix here, a modern cruiser which was completely ignored by the second wave, not to mention the first wave of torpedo bombers, which was completely...
Interesting footnote, the USS Phoenix would later be sold to the Argentinian Navy and become the ARA General Belgrano. She would be sunk during the Falklands War.
Ignored by the second wave, not to mention the first wave of torpedo bombers. She was a suitable target. But even more telling was the fact that the naval yard was basically ignored. 4 modern 10-ton cruisers were tied up here, all of them packed so closely together. One could hardly have missed anything of value had the attack been concentrated here. On top of this, these ships were in a very vulnerable position. Flammable materials were scattered throughout, hatches were open, fire main systems might have been isolated. A bomb hit here would have caused a tremendous fire and been particularly devastating. And there was no smoke around this area at all. The Japanese missed a chance to deliver a more effective blow. Only about 10 dive bombers attacked this area, and as previously mentioned, only a damaged near miss caused any damage whatsoever. By 9:30, the attack was over. The attack left behind 2,335 people dead and another 1,178 wounded. Civilian casualties totaled 103, including 68 dead. 5 battleships have been sunk, but only 2 were permanent losses, the Arizona and the Oklahoma. The rest were repaired and served before the war's end. The other 3 battleships at Pearl Harbor suffered light damage. However, this attack didn't really cripple the Pacific Fleet. Soon the Japanese would realize that it wasn't these old, obsolete battleships that posed
Look at all that oil.
the Pacific Fleet. Soon the Japanese would realize that it wasn't these old, obsolete battleships that posed the real danger to them. It was the carriers that they had missed. They would soon feel their vengeance half a year later. To the list we can add a target ship and a mine layer, and the repair ship Vestal, which was beached. There was heavy to moderate damage to 3 destroyers, 2 light cruisers, and a sea tender. And there was light damage to a light cruiser. The Japanese also achieved great success on their strikes on the airfield spread out on Oahu. Over 160 planes were destroyed. They destroyed 2 to 3 times the number of aircraft that they had expected. The Japanese lost only 29 planes, 9 in the first wave, 20 in the second wave, a testament to the Americans' quick air defense. Also, none of Japan's 5 midget submarines made it back. Was the mission accomplished? Well, yes, all 4 battleships hit by torpedoes were out of the war for 6 months or more, and they had sunk 1 other battleship by bombs alone. And with that, the Kido Butai sailed back home, unscathed. World War II had just started for America, and the sneak attack left behind a temporary shocked nation, but a nation that afterwards would be resolved to finish the war with nothing less than a total victory on their side.
Never.
The Japanese had awoken a sleeping giant.
Awesome video. Nice job, Julien. Again, if it was someone else and he was just posting it, but that's who I saw it from on the Discord. Join the Discord. Like, subscribe. I know this is the first part of a series. We will be continuing it, of course, along with the Caesar series and a few others tossed in. All right. Hope you guys are doing well. See you guys next time.